Building a workers' utopia. Under the dream-like slogan of building a workers' utopia, horrific massacres took place in Southeast Asia. Between 1975 and 1979, in less than 4 years, an unprecedented tragedy occurred where 1 in 4 Cambodians was killed. During this period, people were brutally tortured and killed for simply being able to read, having pale hands, or wearing glasses. Revolutionary soldiers, gripped by madness, often used farm tools to crush heads, sparing bullets and taking innocent lives. Out of a population of about 8 million, approximately 2 million people were slaughtered, earning Cambodia the grim nickname the Killing Fields. This tragedy was widely publicized through the film The Killing Fields. In the 1970s, Cambodia was a land of blood-curdling screams, and at the top of this hell was the Hitler of Southeast Asia, Pol Pot. Cambodia is surrounded by 3 countries. To the left is Thailand, above is Laos, and to the southeast is Vietnam. Over 90% of Cambodia's population are Khmer. Historically, the Khmer established a vast empire covering modern-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and most of Vietnam. In the 12th century, they built Angkor Wat, the world's largest temple and a great relic of human history. Fast forward to the 20th century, which can be summed up as the age of genocide and slaughter. Under the immense shadow of the Cold War, the interests of powerful nations were intricately intertwined, and tensions and conflicts were ongoing between the allies of the US and the Soviet Union. Some countries declared neutrality, refusing to participate in the Cold War, collectively known as the Third World. In the Third World, communism and nationalism mixed, filling the air with the fervor of revolution. Cambodia, like other Southeast Asian nations, was in turmoil, with various factions growing in power amid ideological conflicts. Cambodia was a French protectorate from 1863 until November 9, 1953, when it gained full independence. King Norodom Sihanouk, the central figure of the independence movement, actively worked with the international community to achieve independence from France. In 1955, after independence, he declared the nation's neutrality, refusing to take sides in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. The US government, intent on preventing the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, was displeased with this neutral diplomatic policy. In 1970, General Lon Nol overthrew Sihanouk, leading a coup to seize power, with the US supporting his anti-communist regime. During the Vietnam War, the US believed there were North Vietnamese bases in Cambodia. This led to heavy bombings from 1969 to 1973, resulting in numerous civilian casualties. The incompetence and irresponsibility of the Lon Nol regime, coupled with these bombings, intensified anti-American sentiment in Cambodia. During this time, Pol Pot, the hero of the Cambodian Communist Revolution, took over the capital, Phnom Penh. Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge regime was a radical leftist armed group. In 1975, they established Democratic Kampuchea, proclaiming strong nationalist communism. Citizens, dreaming of a new era, looked to the revolutionaries with hopeful eyes, but that hope was soon extinguished. During Pol Pot's 3 years and 7 months in power, Cambodia was turned into a wasteland. Pol Pot's revolutionary policies were extremely radical. His revolution had 2 main pillars: radical socialism and anti-Vietnamese nationalism. To understand his ideological background, let's look at his early years. Pol Pot was captivated by communist ideology while volunteering with a socialist circle during his studies in Paris. He felt the power of collective labor and was drawn to communism. Upon returning home, he began communist activities, working as a teacher at a municipal high school in Phnom Penh in 1956. Fascinated by Mao Zedong's ideology, Pol Pot started an experiment in utopian agrarian socialism. He aimed to maximize agricultural production to achieve national strength and prosperity. He forced 2 to 3 million urban residents to relocate to the northwest rural areas, the largest grain-producing regions. Why did Pol Pot's regime take such drastic measures? They believed that the urban middle class had to return to the land, cleanse themselves of the filth from the city, and reform themselves. They aimed to eradicate counter-revolutionary elements and potential national enemies, believing this would strengthen and purify Cambodia. Cambodians were forced to abandon all identities and professions overnight and become farmers. During the long marches to their new rural lives, many elderly, sick, and children died from malaria and other diseases. Moreover, countless families were torn apart. If someone left the ranks, the revolutionaries treated them worse than animals and brutally punished them. Phnom Penh, once known as the Paris of Asia due to its French-style buildings, became a ghost town overnight, with urban residents working in rural collective farms. Cambodians had to work 14 to 18 hours a day to meet targets. Pol Pot believed that physical labor was the means to cultivate proletarian consciousness. They worked relentlessly, with their daily food ration being just a bowl of porridge. This led to deaths from starvation, malnutrition, and overwork. It didn't end there. The emphasis on collectivism destroyed traditional family relationships. People were forced to call strangers mother and father and live in communal kitchens and collective housing. The policy of forced marriages prohibited free love, and those who refused to marry someone against their will were killed. The freedom to choose what to wear was also taken away. People had to wear prescribed clothing every day and had no freedom of movement, living a life where all human freedoms were deprived. Cambodia's social situation became extremely drastic. The borders were closed, completely cutting off contact with the outside world, and the logic of a capitalist economy was abolished, erasing the monetary economy. Private property and wage labor disappeared overnight. Markets vanished, and even small shops were eradicated. This was due to collectivization, an ideology that idealizes nationalizing key means of production at a collective level. All schools in Cambodia were closed, and all education, except for communist propaganda lessons, was banned. Thus, Cambodians lost all forms of freedom, even the freedom to think. Under the indoctrination policy led by Pol Pot's regime, the entire population was undergoing mental reformation. Pol Pot's plans were a blend of the Soviet Union's collective farming system, China's Great Leap Forward, and North Korea's Juche ideology. Another target of Pol Pot's regime was the intellectual class. High-ranking officials, doctors, pharmacists, professors, and the middle class from the Lon Nol regime were indiscriminately executed. Anyone related to Vietnam or foreign countries was also purged. Moreover, innocent children were also killed to prevent future revenge. Revolutionaries brutally smashed the heads of innocent people against trees, and newborns were not spared in the name of preventing future revenge. Even being able to read, having pale hands, or wearing glasses could classify someone as an intellectual, leading to torture and execution. Revolutionary soldiers, saying bullets were too precious, used farm tools and hammers to hit their victims. They lost their humanity and were consumed by collective madness. The gallbladders of victims, extracted before death, were used as tonics by high-ranking officials. Cambodians lived in fear. The national infrastructure was utterly destroyed, and the land of Cambodia echoed with blood-curdling screams. In the hell where family, friends, old acquaintances, and neighbors disappeared, extreme survival instincts took over. Those who felt they were likely targets of the massacre hid their identities or, believing they would die anyway, bravely attempted to escape. During this period, there were about 300 killing fields nationwide. The most notorious site was Tuol Sleng, known as the Auschwitz of Asia. Originally a high school, it was converted into the most infamous prison and execution site during Pol Pot's regime. About 20,000 people were taken to Tuol Sleng, but only 12 survived. Today, Tuol Sleng Museum is a globally recognized site, displaying the remains, belongings of the victims, and the iron beds and shackles used for torture. Detailed records of the execution methods and torture are also preserved. Photos of victims' bodies with name tags pinned not on their outer clothing but elsewhere, faces unrecognizable due to being hit with shovels, and faces turned 180 degrees on beds, too gruesome to look at, are also kept. Visitors to this place feel a chilling sense of the horrors of the time. During this period, countless lives were lost. In just 3 years and 7 months, approximately 2 million out of 8 million people died. Killing a quarter of the population in such a short time is a feat almost impossible to achieve outside of war, an unprecedented record born out of the crazed ambitions of political leaders. Meanwhile, Pol Pot was an anti-Vietnamese racist. Under the pretext of recovering lost lands, he recklessly invaded Vietnam and occupied some Vietnamese territory. This gave Vietnam an excuse to invade Cambodia, eventually leading to the collapse of Pol Pot's regime. In December 1978, 100,000 Vietnamese troops launched a full-scale attack on Cambodia. For the Vietnamese military, attacking Cambodia was as easy as eating a piece of cake. Vietnam had the latest weapons supported by their Soviet allies, and the Vietnamese soldiers were already battle-hardened from the Vietnam War. They also had some advanced equipment and fighter jets left by the US after its withdrawal from South Vietnam. The Cambodian army, inferior in every way, fell like autumn leaves. Incidentally, Vietnam was fully communist by then, having unified North and South Vietnam under communist rule in 1975. In 1979, when the Vietnamese army reached Phnom Penh, Pol Pot's dream of a utopian communist society came to an end. Pol Pot fled to the northern mountains and continued guerrilla warfare. He died irresponsibly in the jungle on April 15, 1998, without a single apology for the nationwide massacre he had committed. Pol Pot's body, who had killed countless innocent people under the worst tyranny, was burned along with garbage. Pol Pot, one of the worst villains in history, left an astonishing interview during his lifetime. He said he wasn't cruel and had nothing to feel guilty about. Pol Pot pushed Cambodia back nearly a century, significantly reducing its population. The country's power declined drastically as all the skilled workforce was slaughtered, eventually branding Cambodia as the poorest country in Southeast Asia. After Pol Pot's regime, a pro-Vietnamese regime led by Heng Samrin and Hun Sen took over in 1979, ushering in the era of the People's Republic of Kampuchea. After implementing a population increase policy, Cambodia became one of the countries with the lowest average age in the international community. As of today, the average age is 27, with over 70% of the population under 35. In 1989, the Vietnamese army withdrew, and from 1989 to 1993, the State of Cambodia era began. The Cambodian People's Revolutionary Party changed the country's name to the State of Cambodia and pursued decommunization. In 1993, with the help of the United Nations, the modern Kingdom of Cambodia was born. Endlessly plagued by civil wars, Cambodia became a minefield. By the mid-1990s, about 10 million landmines were buried in the ground, with 200 to 300 people stepping on mines each month and getting injured. Therefore, Cambodia is considered the country with the highest proportion of disabled people. It is a sad landscape of modern Cambodian history, showing the tragedy of a small country helplessly swayed between powerful neighboring countries. This has been the story of the Cambodian killing fields. If you have any topics you would like to see, please leave a comment anytime. Thank you for watching.